I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is Render the Darkness.
Hello.
Alright, so today we are still in our 50 state series. We're still in Michigan, and we are going to be covering part 2 of the Bath Schoolhouse disaster. I will catch you up just a little bit. On part 1, we discussed the history of the school, when it was built, why it was built, the weight of the taxing that it brought on the community, and we discussed a man by the name of Andrew Kehoe, and we also discussed a man by the name of Emery Hook. That is kind of where you need to be for part 2. To kind of understand where we're starting here. If you didn't see part 1, Andrew was a very eccentric farmer who was a member of the school board, who was very upset about many things going on in the school board and the community, and with the tax being charged, and his wife had failing health. He had a lot of things going on. He had head injuries. He hadn't paid his mortgage in like 5 years. Lots of things going on with Andrew, and Emery was superintendent of the school, trying to do the best he could for the students and for the school and improve as much as he could. And that kind of puts us to the date of the event for part 2, which is May 18th, 1927. Again, I will put in a trigger warning, as I did in part 1. This does involve kids, it does involve animals. If that is something that triggers you, I would absolutely not stick around for this part of the episode. I will also warn you that I will probably cry a couple of times while trying to get through this, because it's very hard to get through, because it is a lot. I had a very difficult time writing this part of the case. And also I've been sick for about 7 or 8 days now, so. So again, when we left off at part 1, we had just gotten to the day of the events in this case, May 18th, 1927. On that morning, initially it was storming, like thundering and lightning, and the school's well pump wasn't working right, so it needed to be looked at. Thinking it wouldn't take long for the repairman to get there, Frank Smith, who was the janitor of the school, opted to not start up the generator that powered the school, so that meant that the school day would start with no power. But fortunately, it didn't take long for the clouds to part and the sun to come out. So it really didn't affect a whole lot, other than maybe like the school bell. I think they ended up pulling out like a gong or something that they would hit. But despite having no electricity, the school carried on as usual. Unbeknownst to anyone that would be coming into the school throughout the morning, something was happening underneath the school. What is that?
Plane.
Sorry. I'm so sorry. It was like a whole lot going on outside.
Yeah.
But unbeknownst to them, something was going on underneath the school, specifically the north wing of the basement. There was a tiny timer set for 8:45 a.m. When that timer reached 8:45, a spark would ignite a wire attached to the timer, which would send electricity through multiple other wires connected to the main wire connected to the timer. These wires were equipped with blasting caps. At the end of them, when the blasting caps went off, that would in turn be the trigger point for the dynamite and pyridol that was set up. Once triggered, massive explosion would take place. Meanwhile, the Kehoe's neighbor, Miss Lulu Hart, heard a thump on the roof of her hen house. She was standing at around 8:45 a.m. When she went to inspect the noise, she heard a bang come from the Kehoes. She instantly thought, gunshot. Shortly after that, she saw smoke coming from the roof of their corn crib. And within seconds, the whole structure was up in flames. She grabbed her husband David to let him know what she had just heard and seen, and they watched from the edge of their property as the barn went up in flames as well, and smoke began coming out of the house. and then they heard more gunshots. Lulu wanted to go to the house and check on them, but David stopped her because he knew Andrew had lit those fires himself. Meanwhile, back at the school, that timer went off, and a blast had taken out the entire north wing of the Bath Consolidated School. The walls were thrown up about 4 feet, collapsing outward with the roof immediately slamming down on top of the wall debris, taking anything and anyone inside with it. Classrooms surrounding the north wing were affected greatly. The floor shook and shot a few feet into the air, and the children were thrown into walls, floors buckled, and in some rooms the light globes were crashing into the floors. Homes surrounding the school, their windows were blown out completely, and the blast echoed for miles and miles. Through the debris and the dust that now covered what just moments ago was the north wing of the school, all that could be seen was the remains of material of the building and the bodies of small children. I'm sorry, I gotta get a drink. I'm so sorry. Hi, Cap. Bodies of children who were in the building and bodies of children who had been thrown from the blast. Now it was time for quick actions, which ones could be saved and which ones could not. The town immediately forged together, most rushing to the school as they had children in school that day themselves. Meanwhile, there were others that hadn't yet heard the school had been blown up, but they did hear the gunshots and see and smell the smoke from the Kehoe's residence, which now was almost entirely in flames. One of those people was a man named O.H. Buck, who was a consumer's power foreman. He went to check on the Kehoes, and he found a broken window on the side of the house that wasn't completely engulfed in flames yet. He could see into the living room, and he called for survivors, but no one answered. When no one answered, he thought they could at least save whatever furniture they could before the fire took everything Andrew and Nellie owned. Keeping in mind, no one knew for sure at this point whether or not anyone was actually home. They managed to get some stuff out, but before Buck realized it, he noticed that there was a brick of dynamite propped up in a corner. He quickly removed it, then got out. For all they knew, there was more dynamite set up somewhere. As he was leaving, this was when he was told the school had been blown up. After hearing several more explosions behind him, he could see the smoke from the school, and he took off in that direction. Back at the schoolhouse, a slew of people, rescuers, and largely parents, began arriving frantic and desperate to first find their children and second, help in any way they could. Upon arriving, they could hear cry after cry for help. By this point, many students had climbed on top of the school roof in a desperate attempt to escape, so some rescuers, including Superintendent Emery, were trying to get them down as quickly as possible, as some of them were threatening to jump off the roof, probably too high to jump off safely, and in fear that the building would continue to blow up, they wanted to get the kids off the roof as fast as they could. Now, some of these kids were too scared and they couldn't wait to be gotten down safely, and they were actually jumping and breaking their legs on impact.
Oh. Well, they survived though, right?
They did, but they were definitely injured. Other rescuers were rushing to the north wing, where unfortunately 7-year-old Doris John's lifeless body was hanging suspended in debris by her heels, very much in plain sight.
Oh gosh.
Emery and others made their way to the debris and began pulling out the bodies, while other children were still trying to dig themselves out of the debris that they were buried under so someone could see they were still alive. People began opening their homes as a place to put the injured. Sorry, this is a hard case to get through. The injured children were being pulled out one by one. People were substituting whatever they had on hand for medical supplies. Just like pure chaos. The deceased were being laid out on a grass field. Their little bodies were being covered with blankets. Sorry. it's hard because A, it's children, and B, I've seen pictures of every one of these children. So I just keep seeing their little faces. Anyway, so all of this, the school explosion, the Kehoe farm fire, the rescue attempts, had all taken place within a span of 15 minutes. It would take much longer than that, obviously, to get everyone out.
Yeah.
Back then, they didn't have the same level of equipment we have now. Sorry. And realizing that some of the children were trapped under the heavy roof, they needed to figure out a way to lift it as tenderly as possible. They went with what they had, themselves. As for improvised tools, they went with rope and telephone poles. By this point, the Lansing Fire Department, State Police, and the State Department had all been informed of what was going on in Bath. The Fire Department in Lansing didn't hesitate. They bolted toward the school. The Fire Department Chief Hugo Delfs was in utter disbelief at the tragic mayhem that was before him. While all this was ensuing, let's go back to the Kehoe farm, where a man named Sidney Armstrong and the Howells, who are another set of the Kehoe's neighbors, had gone to the property and saw a man next to one of the burning structures. He was backing a truck up. He then got out and pulled a funnel from his gas tank. He then got back of the truck and drove towards them. Howell recognized the man as he drove closer. It was Andrew Kehoe. Andrew stopped, told the men they'd better get to the school, and then Andrew himself headed off to the direction of the school. By the time the Lansing Fire Department made it to the school, Andrew had almost made it there himself. Now, Job Slate, another one of the residents of the town, saw Andrew passing by him, and Andrew just waved. And another man by the name of Monty Ellsworth saw Andrew driving east toward the school, and again, Andrew just waved and grinned and kept driving. All of a sudden, during the chaos, while everyone was distracted trying to help the children, a second explosion could be heard and felt by everyone. Some thought maybe a car had caught fire and a gas tank exploded. But then there was another loud boom, then another. At this explosion, a vehicle could be seen blowing up, flying high into the sky. Now, the information about this explosion was pieced together by witnesses and mostly assumptions of what must have happened. And that was that Andrew must have pulled up to the school and called Emery over to his truck. Emery would have ran over for two reasons. One, Andrew was a school board member and needed to know what was going on. And two, Emery wanted to ask Andrew to use his Ford pickup truck to help get rope and supplies to help aid in the rescue efforts. Andrew agreed and told Emery, quote, "All right, I'll take you with me," end quote. At that, Andrew pulled out a pistol. Some accounts varied here. Some said pistol, some said rifle, and some said he didn't have a gun at all, but rather he had rigged a switch he could flip. Either way, Andrew shot and hit a cache of dynamite that was in the truck, sending the truck, himself, and Emery through the air, ripping all of them apart.
Dang.
Hot metal flew everywhere. And if that's not bad enough, Andrew fully intended to take anyone near them out as well. He had prepackaged that truck with every bit of metal farm debris he could. He had things like scrap metal, nuts, bolts, and nails that were all sent flying out of the explosion. Many vehicles close to the truck were caught on fire. The nuts, bolts, and nails were hitting people, mainly students. Pretty much from every direction. Among those injured in this explosion was Cleo Clayton, a second grader, who literally just escaped the school blast somehow unharmed. Shrapnel shot into his stomach and lodged into his spine. He would go on to pass away. Some of these cases just really get you. Anna Perrone, who had her infant daughter in her arms and her son Dominic, who was only a toddler at her side. She was able to shield her children from the flying debris completely, but not herself. She was hit with a piece of metal that tore a hole in her skull and a piece of burr that lodged into her eye. Steven Stavitsky, who was in the 6th grade, had a piece of metal blast into his arm as he laid in the street already with 2 broken legs. F.M. Fritz had a bolt lodged into his chest that moved up his shoulder and down to his elbow. Perry Hart, who was hit by a piece of 2-inch iron in his heel where it lodged into his ankle. Thelma Bedkoff was hit in the legs by flying metal, which cut her open in multiple places. Then there was Glenn Smith, Frank Smith, the school janitor's brother, whose left leg was completely sheared off at the thigh. His hand was completely destroyed. His body was burnt almost entirely, as well, and a piece of metal tore a very deep hole into his right ankle. He would pass away from his injuries. And lastly, there was Nelson McFerrin, who was closest to the blast, who died on impact. By 10 a.m., the St. Lawrence Hospital in Lansing was beginning to drown in victims from the school bombing. Dr. Milton Shaw, who was the head of the Red Cross, arrived on scene along with doctors and nurses from both Lansing hospitals, which were St. Lawrence and Lansing Sparrow. Triage units were quickly set up on the lawns, and patients were getting prepared for transport by ambulance. By this point, news had spread throughout most of central Michigan, and volunteer after volunteer began arriving to assist. While all this was going on, Dr. Shaw and a man named Alex Urquhart saw a red lump on the side of the road. When further inspecting, they quickly realized not only was it a body, or part of it, it had something in what they assumed was once a pocket. It was a driver's license and a bank book. The head and face was almost still intact. For the most part, it was still intact. And after having a few people identify the face and associating the driver's license to the body, it was determined that this was in fact the remains of Andrew Keogh. Eventually, a Lansing police officer noticed debris from the ceiling was falling down into the basement. His name was Captain John O'Brien. He was assisted in cautiously assessing how close the debris was falling into the coal room by a sheriff deputy named William Clark. When the men went to the basement to do that, they found dynamite. By this point, it was 10:45, and rescue efforts had to be called off. Not only did they find dynamite, but it was wired dynamite, and they had no clue what it was attached to. Ceiling debris was everywhere, and so it could literally explode any second. Not to mention they had no clue if there was more somewhere else. It was also connected to a timing device, just like the first one was. 2 state troopers, Ernest Buck Holdman and Donald McNaughton, along with a Michigan State College engineer by the name of I hope I say this right, Fippany, joined forces to re-enter the basement and assess. They discovered the wire of the dynamite was connected to a tin pipe, connected by bolts, and ran a long way through the ceiling into many rooms of the basement, and it was packed full of dynamite. Even more dynamite was found hidden by wire mesh and plaster, connected to blasting caps, with wire connecting the explosive caches all throughout the ceiling. More wire upon more wire were found, held in place by staples, and they just kept finding more wire, more blasting caps, more dynamite, and Paradol that all led to a hot shot battery that was in fact connected to a timer. The time on it had passed, which meant that by some miracle, for whatever reason, whatever miscalculation on Andrew's part had been made, these didn't trigger.
Oh, that's good.
Only the ones for the North Wing actually went off. Now, if these other ones had triggered, not only would it have destroyed the entire school, killing everybody in it, it likely would have probably demolished most of the town. Eventually, they were able to remove all of it from under the school and the ceiling and the little hideaway places Andrew had stashed some more in and the rain gutters he had shoved it in, to find a total of 504 pounds of dynamite and pyridol were removed from the school. 100 pounds of that was believed to be what went off under the north wing.
Damn it.
One more drink. Sorry. Afterward, rescue efforts continued. The efforts would continue on well into the next day, and the final death toll was tragically very high. The victims were, try to get through this, Arnold Victor Burrell, 8 years old. Herman Bergen, 11 years old. Henry Bergen, 14 years old. Emily Marion Broman, 11 years old. Robert Ferdinand Broman, 12 years old. Floyd Edwin Burnett, 11 years old. Russell Chapman, 8 years old. Guy Cleo Clayton Jr., lovingly called Cleo, 8 years old. Boris Robert Cochran, lovingly called Bobby, 8 years old. Ralph Albert Cushman, 7 years old. Earl Edwin Ewing, 11 years old. Catherine Onnalee Foote, 10 years old. Marjorie Fritz, 11 years old. Carlisle Walter Geisenhaver, 9 years old. Beatrice Pearl Gibbs, 10 years old. George Cannon Hall Jr., 10 years old. Willa Marie Hall, 12 years old. Iola Irene Hart, 12 years old. Percy Eugene Hart, 11 years old. Vivian Oletta Hart, 9 years old. Blanche Elizabeth Puller Hart, 30 years old. Galen Lyle Hart, 12 years old. Levere Robert Hart, 9 years old. Stanley Horace Hart, 12 years old. Francis Otto Hopner, 13 years old. Cecil Lorne Hunter, 13 years old. Emery Eli Hook, 32 years old. Doris Elaine Johns, 7 years old. Andrew Kehoe, 55 years old. Nellie Kehoe, 51 years old. Clarence Wendell McFerrin, 13 years old. Nelson Robert McFerrin, 75 years old. Thelma Irene McDonald, 7 years old. James Emerson Medcoff, lovingly called Jay, 9 years old. Emma Amelia Nichols, 13 years old. Richard Dibble Richardson, 12 years old. Elsie Mildred Robb, 12 years old. Pauline May Schertz, technically 8 years old, but her birthday was May 19th, 1916, so she died one day before her 9th birthday. Glenn Smith, 33 years old. Hazel Iva Weatherby, 20 years old. Elizabeth Jane Witchell, 10 years old. Lucille June Witchell, 9 years old. Harold Lamone Woodman, 8 years old. just in case I said that wrong, I'm also going to say Harold Lemoyne Woodman, 8 years old. George Orville Zimmerman, 10 years old. Lloyd George Zimmerman, 12 years old. And it left 59 others injured. Most of them for life in one way or another. And as you may have noticed, Nellie Kehoe was one of the victims listed. When the Kehoe farm was being investigated, after Nellie's sisters had informed Mr. Dunback, the estate attorney, that they couldn't get a hold of her and found out Andrew had lied about where their sister had been, the police made several disturbing findings on the farm. Officer George Carpenter, a rookie, was assigned to go investigate. It was him and one other policeman, and while they were taking a break, they noticed a cart near the chicken coop, which was one of the only places on the farm that hadn't been completely destroyed by fire. Well, it was sort of a cart. It was like a makeshift cart Andrew was crafting. Anyway, in the cart were the remains of Nellie. She was badly burned. Both of her arms were dislocated or fractured. Her skull was cracked. It was nearly impossible due to the condition of her body to know if these injuries were by force or if the fire had caused them. But Andrew was absolutely considered the most likely cause. She had things placed all around her body like silverware and a box containing a gold watch, earrings, a brooch, chains, 1 diamond ring, 1 opal ring, teaspoons with K's sketched into them, a marriage license, hospital bills, and a roll of what appeared to be either money or bonds that was too badly burnt to know for sure which one it was. Nellie wasn't all that was found. They also found that the Kehoe's 2 horses were burned to a crisp in the barn, and that their feet had been bound by wire to ensure that they could not escape.
Oh my God.
Nellie was buried in Mount Hope Cemetery in Lansing, Michigan. As for Andrew's burial, or what could be buried, he was buried in an anonymous location with multiple fake plots placed around him in an attempt to stop people who would want to destroy his resting place. We know he was buried somewhere at Mount Rest Cemetery in St. John's, Michigan, but no one truly knows where. And in my opinion, that's far better than he deserved.
Yeah.
And that is the very tragic, very hard to get through story of the Bath Consolidated Schoolhouse Massacre. Just tragic and just senseless.
It was a terrible case. God. I mean, I'm not saying, that anything would have been okay for him to do, like if he was upset at that guy or whatever, the school. I'm not saying anything would have been okay to do, but to do it with the kids there, like why didn't he just do it like when nobody was there, just take the school down? I don't understand that.
I did read where some people, again, this is just speculation, so the part that I didn't put in here was that there was to be another school meeting set on May 20th. It was believed, some people, that it was intended for the bomb to go off during the school board meeting when there weren't any kids in the school, because as far as anybody knew, Andrew didn't have anything against the children. He was very nice to the children. He loved acted like, say that, I'm not going to say he loved the children. He acted like he loved the children. So some people believe that it was a timing misfire or timing issue. Because, even though the times are on those things, there's not a date on them. So some people believe that it was never intended to go off while school was in session. It was intended to go off while the school board members were there. And that something just went wrong with the timing device and it went off too early. So I did read that in a source or two as something people thought might have been the case.
Yeah. Either way, it's terrible, but... either way, it's not justifiable. But yeah.
I do want to mention that one of the sources that I did use for this case was a book which was written by Arnie Bernstein titled Bath Massacre, America's First School Bombing. And it gives a much more detailed explanation of who Andrew was, the people of Bath at the time, and the actual events itself. It goes into a lot of detail that I just, as you can see, I could barely get through giving almost no detail. It gives a lot more detail. So for somebody that would want to know more of that, definitely a book you should check out and read. I do recommend it. It was a good book. It really gives a lot of the insight into that day. I mean, to the point where you almost feel like you're just standing there watching the day happen. The amount of detail that you get in this book. It was a good read. It was an emotional read. It was hard to read, but I feel like, especially for somebody doing a case on it or somebody interested in this case, I think it's an important read. And it also talks about things like we were just talking about, people's theories about Andrew and what his intent really was and that kind of stuff. So anyway, I do recommend that book. But other than that, that is, I would say, and definitely in the top 3 worst cases I've ever covered. I hate doing cases that involve kids.
Yeah, me too.
I'm sorry that I was emotional in that. I don't know how somebody could tell it and not be, to be honest. I didn't know I was going to be that emotional, but literally right before we recorded this, I recapped all their little faces, which was probably not a good idea on my part.
Yeah.
It probably definitely increased the emotional
I didn't see
to
any
what
of
was
it,
saying.
and I was crying whenever you were talking about, getting their names and their ages and stuff. And I didn't even see the picture, so I could just imagine, actually, whenever you're saying a name, the picture and it pops up in your head, and that. Excuse me.
But that was my absolutely horrible case, senseless case, and just yet again another reason why people suck, man.
Yeah.
People suck. Because, even if, let's say their theory of, he was intended to do it on the day of the school board meeting. Let's say that's true. 504 pounds of dynamite laced in that school would have taken out most of that town.
That's
if it
true.
had all gone off.
That's true. Yeah.
Or at least a giant chunk of the area that school was in. So
definitely places by the school surrounding it, probably for at least a few miles anyway, you would think.
And he knowingly exploded that truck with all that shrapnel in it, knowing it was going to get people surrounding, and knowing he'd driven to the school to do that. Yeah. So I don't believe that he intended to blow it up during the school board meeting. I think it blew up exactly when he meant for it to, and I think the rest of the dynamite is what failed to go off.
Yeah.
I think his plan was to take that whole school down and everyone in that town with it, in one way or another.
Yeah, that's what it seemed.
But, yeah. If you stuck around for that, thank you for sticking around for that. I know that was a hard one to listen to. It's probably a hard one to watch with me being a big baby.
Well, yeah, they were right to be. On that one, all of them were terrible, but, man.
I hate when it involves kids, but when this one involved 45 kids.
Yeah, there's a lot of kids.
And little kids.
Yeah.
It's just sad. Anyway, that's our case. If you have any input or anything like that, or if you like our podcast and what we're doing with telling these stories and keeping these names of these victims alive and out there, we'd appreciate a like, a share, a follow, anything you're willing to do. We'd appreciate it. Other than that, see you next time. Bye.